By April 2026, the simultaneous and intensifying conflicts in the Middle East and Eastern Europe have converged into a singular geopolitical crisis. In Washington, the defense posture has taken a highly aggressive turn. The Pentagon is now officially operating as the Department of War, with Secretary Pete Hegseth promising that enemies challenging the United States will be crushed with ferocity. That ferocity is directed squarely at Tehran. Following joint U.S.-Israeli strikes, President Donald Trump issued a stark ultimatum, threatening to completely obliterate Iranian civilization if the country did not yield. Simultaneously, the guardrails in Eastern Europe are disintegrating. The New START nuclear arms control treaty has collapsed, and Vladimir Putin is actively preparing to resume comprehensive underground nuclear testing at Novaya Zemlya. Watching troop movements on these two disconnected maps won't explain the reality of this crisis. To understand 2026, you have to look at how an American military campaign in the Persian Gulf accidentally became the primary funding engine for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After Washington and Tel Aviv began heavily bombarding Iranian targets in late February, Tehran realized it couldn't win a direct conventional war. Instead, they deployed an asymmetric strategy designed to inflict maximum economic pain. They closed off the Strait of Hormuz, the exit valve for a massive portion of the world's oil. When tankers stopped moving, the global supply chain contracted, energy markets panicked, and crude prices skyrocketed overnight. Striking military targets in a heavily concentrated oil-rich region like the Middle East guarantees that a localized fight will destabilize the entire global energy market. 3,000 miles to the north, those skyrocketing crude prices triggered a massive, immediate financial windfall for the Kremlin. Every $10 increase in global oil generates an extra $1.6 billion of revenue for Russia monthly. This capital bypasses Western sanctions, flowing directly from lucrative oil wells to the front lines to finance military operations. By launching a campaign to contain and dismantle an adversary in the Middle East, the United States inadvertently created the exact market conditions that financed its adversary in Eastern Europe. For Kiev, this was a disaster. They were suddenly facing a heavily enriched Russian military across a stalled, crescent-shaped front line stretching over 1,200 kilometers. Ukraine bypassed those frozen trenches entirely by deploying domestically manufactured FP-1 drones, which boast a 1,500-kilometer flight range. They directed these long-range swarms deep into Russian territory, targeting massive Baltic Sea oil export terminals like Ust-Luga and Primorsk. The strikes successfully crippled storage and shipping infrastructure. Both ports were forced to halt cargo shipments entirely, marking the sharpest fall in Russia's Baltic oil exports since 2022, and costing Moscow roughly $1 billion. The burning crude ignited sky-high fires, carrying the literal, toxic smell of war directly into President Putin's hometown of St. Petersburg. In a prolonged war of attrition, destroying the enemy's checkbook is now just as critical as holding a trench. To prevent total obliteration before a looming deadline, Washington and Tehran agreed to a fragile 14-day conditional ceasefire, with negotiations slated for Islamabad. The primary condition of this pause is that Iran will temporarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping, easing the immense pressure on the global market. But this tentative arrangement remains highly precarious. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has explicitly stated the ceasefire does not apply to their continuing military strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Global energy markets are treating the pause with deep skepticism. Even with the shipping lanes unblocked, restoring damaged regional refineries and stabilizing jet fuel supplies will take months of uninterrupted peace. The 2026 crisis shows how interconnected modern warfare has become. When a naval blockade in the Persian Gulf serves as the primary funding mechanism for a land war in Europe, the idea of a contained regional conflict no longer reflects the economic reality.